Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey guys, and welcome to this episode of the podcast. Today we have another exciting episode featuring Ryan and myself. And we are talking about whether or not travel makes you a bad employee.
Yeah, and obviously going on a big backpacking trip changes you. And we're going to kind of talk about our experience going on this big backpacking trip, coming home, trying to get into a career, and then eventually deciding to peace out and to go travel again.
Yeah. So sort of the idea around this podcast episode was thinking back to when we graduated university. We took our first big backpacking trip. We went to Europe, Southeast Asia, Australia, New Zealand. And our mindset for that backpacking trip was sort of like, okay, we've graduated university. We've got this like chunk of time where we can really just, go out and have some fun and enjoy ourselves before we settle into real life. So at that point in time, it was never like, we're going to live a nomadic lifestyle. We're going to work for ourselves and be entrepreneurs. It wasn't really the mindset at that point. We were very, very much in sort of still like the conventional life path, just taking a break from it to go sort of like be free for a couple months.
Yeah, it was like a really, 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 really long extended vacation, 6 months. But yeah, I think that when we set out, it was always, this is, you enjoy it because afterwards you're going to come home, you're going to get a job. This is like part of the journey. It's the great trip after your education to complete you and round you out as a person.
Yeah. And it was sort of this like, I don't know, it's strange to think back to it because coming back, I feel like I remember feeling so overwhelmed by all the questions coming back. Like, okay, So what's next? What are you going to do? Like, we hadn't lived together before then. So it's like, are you guys going to get a place together?
But I remember even once we started traveling, I think our first stop was Iceland. And we were talking to a couple people we met there who were a little bit older than us. And they were like, oh, you guys are recently graduated. What are you going to do? What's happening in the future? So even when we started traveling, that question was kind of getting posed.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a good point. Actually, I kind of forgot about that. And it's something that it's sort of one of the questions that people just ask you when you meet new people. It's sort of once you get past the generic, like, where'd you come from? Where are you going? Where are you from? How long are you here for?
What's your favorite color?
What's your favorite color? What's your favorite romance novel? What's your shoe size? And then they ask you usually, what do you do? So that was sarcasm in case anyone missed that. Nobody's ever asked
Sarcasm
me.
alert.
Nobody's ever asked me my shoe size, and I don't read romance novels.
What's your shoe size?
8. 38 European. What about you?
No comment.
Massive feet. Anyways, so
conversation is completely derailed.
So people will usually ask, what do you do back home? And
I do nothing, bitch. Unemployed.
Funemployed. But yeah, it was like really easy to be like, oh yeah, we just graduated university. Like we're just taking a break and then we're going to like start our careers type thing. I feel like that question is a lot easier to defer when you've like never worked before. You haven't quit your job type thing. Yeah.
It's like, it's not the thing that everyone does going traveling after university, but it's common enough. It's like, oh, I'm a recent graduate just doing this trip. It's not like, oh, that's weird.
Yeah. And especially when you start traveling, you meet a ton of Australians like everywhere in the world, and taking sort of a gap year at any point, like either after high school, during university, or after university is extremely common. I think almost all young people in Australia seem to do something along those lines.
That might be a generalization based off our perspective.
Okay,
I'm sure there's lots of people in
do
Australia who haven't done that.
Okay, a lot of them do it though. But anyways.
Every Australian we've ever met outside of Australia has done this.
Every Australian I've ever met traveling has been traveling.
It's so weird.
It's kind of interesting though. The changes that happened to my life traveling were things that I never expected to happen. I didn't go into traveling the first time searching for something. I didn't go into it expecting to have a big life change and a complete shift in how I viewed the world and my world and what I wanted out of my life. I mean, I was very comfortable with where I was at. You know, I was like, okay, I did this university thing. That was sort of like the expectation. I finished. I've got this degree. Like, of course I'm going to go back and get a job. Like, that's what you do.
Yeah.
You go home and you get a job. And it's interesting because the longer we traveled, the more I would meet people doing things that I'd never heard of people doing before. Like people who worked for themselves or worked abroad or, you know, were teaching English or who had sold all their stuff and were just traveling. And it was sort of this thing to me where I was like, what?
Yeah. I remember, London, one of our first hostels, we met a guy who, I think it must have been like late 20s, early 30s or something. He's like, oh yeah, I just work whatever job I can find, save up my money, go traveling. I've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
And then we had another one, which I was just thinking about recently, as kind of like, at the time didn't think of anything of it, but it's kind of stayed a memory where maybe has impacted my life. We were in Switzerland. It was coming to close to the end of our European trip, the European part of our trip. And we were talking to this guy about the 4-hour work week, which I had kind of read the first half of in university. And he was really pumped up about it. And he was working as some sort of like web developer or something in a hostel in Switzerland, you know, just traveling, working, living this life. And I was like, wow, that is really cool. This idea that this could be something you're doing all the time. And at the time I was like, oh, I don't have computer skills. I can't do that. But, years later, it's like, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting the way that, you know, for me, travel shifted my perspective of the possibilities for my life in a really dramatic way. But it was kind of interesting. You know, I experienced these things. I saw these people doing all these things and it kind of opened my eyes to the possibilities of the world. Yet it still didn't really feel like a real possibility for me. Like, I think I came back, and I know I've talked about it in other episodes, like the very back of my travel journal from the first time we left in 2011 had all these things, all these takeaways from my trip, all these ways that I wanted to be, you know, different than the way I was.
But did those, you said before that you didn't really have anything you wanted to get out of it. Do you think, where did those, I know for me, I had a couple things I wanted to work on. Did you have similar stuff going in?
Things I wanted to work on going into the trip?
Yeah.
Not that I can remember. I feel like there must have been like a thing or two, but I think I was more keen on just like, I don't know, like relaxing and having fun, like
checking off a lot of places on your bucket list.
Yeah, like checking places off the bucket list, seeing cool things, like experiencing things. Like travel for me prior to that trip had really been this like very freeing thing. I was very high stress at home. I put a lot of pressure on myself to do well. Sort of like, I guess, type A perfectionist type thing. If you wanted to, I don't know, like quantify it into something.
Psychologize.
Yeah. So, you know, getting like a B was not okay for me in university, which is like, a B is great. There's nothing wrong with a B, but for me, it wasn't okay. And to put that kind of pressure on yourself is really, really stressful. It makes it, you know, you become competitive with your peers, you become competitive with your friends who are in your classes. And it's just like a really not good mind space to be in. So I think that my biggest thing was like relaxing, decompressing. And then the longer we traveled, I think I started realizing like how high strung I had been, how stressed I was, how like controlling I'd been. And I did write a list of things that I'd kind of like learned that I wanted to implement in my life. Like, I think that it was really clear for me when I came back from traveling that I didn't have to sacrifice myself to work a job that didn't make me happy. Yet it's like so easy to lose sight of that when you've got rent to pay and you've got to feed yourself, and you know, everyone around you is kind of like, well, it looks bad on your resume if you quit a job, like, you know, in less time than a year. Like, give it a year, give it 6 months, give it another 6 months. Like,
yeah. And even I remember coming back and having this idea in my head, which I think is kind of out there, that deciding to, in your 4th year of business school, there's a lot of companies that are doing recruiting. So skipping that recruiting because we were going traveling was nice at the time. But I think it was lingering in my head like, oh, maybe I screwed up. I can't get a job in finance because I skipped recruiting.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that it was definitely something that was told to me by some professors that I had good relationships with. Like, it looks really bad to have a gap on your resume. Like, yes, you're going out and having this fun experience, but you're putting yourself behind by 6 months, i.e. I graduated in June 2011, same as you. Yet we were coming out and competing with the graduates of January 2012 for jobs. And that was kind of presented to me as a really negative thing. Like, I should already be in the workforce. I should have 6 months experience already, be getting my first raise. I should be a step ahead of those people because I graduated before them. And so, it was never to the point where I considered not going on that trip. Something was driving me to go there. And I think that I really knew that I needed to do that on an unconscious level. But it was kind of there, this sort of I need to come home and I need to work hard and I need to take whatever job I get and I need to put 100% into it because I'm kind of behind in this rat race. Which is, I don't know, that's a hard thing on a person. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about my perspective getting home. And I remember getting home and moving into my apartment.
Our apartment?
Yeah, our apartment. And feeling I remember having these discussions where it's we had this awesome experience traveling, really connected with feeling alive, the sense of freedom, enjoyment, fun, and already having this kind of aversion to being in a 9-to-5 job lifestyle. I think it's weird. I was kind of excited about it, about taking this step and putting on a suit and getting a job and making money. But on the other hand, I was I know we were talking about right as we got back, saving money, thinking about going traveling again. How long can we really do this stay at home thing?
Yeah, definitely. That's an interesting point to bring up. I felt the same thing, sort of this this toss between putting on a pencil skirt and some kitten heels and looking cute and going to work. And
heels?
What
are kitten heels?
Oh, they're really short heels. So they're still heels, but they're not. I don't know. I don't really like actual heels, but looking nice and going to work and feeling kind of important versus this I really don't feel doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that resonates with me is this I don't know, traveling so freeing in a way that you don't really ever have if you go to public school and then you go right into university. And then, it's so interesting to be 21 or 22, the first time you ever really experience complete freedom with your life. Freedom as in the sense that you can choose to be anywhere you want in the world.
With whoever you want to be.
With whoever you want to be. Doing whatever you want to do. Getting up at whatever time you want to get up. Eating whatever you want to eat at whichever restaurant you want to eat. So many choices. And it's really, it can be really overwhelming, to be honest. When you have structure in your day constantly and you're kind of, told this is what you should eat, this is what you should do, blah, blah, blah. You've got all this structure and you don't have that much freedom. It can be really oh, I've got all these choices. I don't know what to do. I don't really know what I want to do. And you have to find that. But it's also, it's so awesome. It's this really great, it's this really great thing that.
Yeah. And you recognize that you have all this choice, which you do have back at home, but it's easier to feel your life is kind of becoming a burden to you. I wake up in the morning and I've got to do this and I've got to do that and I've got to do this. I have so much stuff that I have to do, even though you don't have to do any of it. If you just chose today to stop doing, if you're driving to work right now, listening to the podcast, you could just be oh, fuck this. I'm not doing it. That is within
So you could.
Yeah.
But that's not something people do. If you don't go to work, you might get fired.
True. But you don't have to do it. You are choosing on some level.
Yeah. I think that it's important to recognize that, as much as that is a choice, it often doesn't feel like a choice.
No, that's what I'm saying. But then, so it feels like a burden. And then when you go traveling, it's oh, hey, this isn't a burden anymore. This is about getting the most out of life. This is about how do I maximize my happiness today and the next couple of weeks or the next couple of months.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just like, just sitting here thinking about it, I've got a massive smile on my face because it's so fun to do it the very first time you do it. And I know we kind of like lived it up a little bit when we were in Europe because it was like, woo, like we can stay out all late, as late as we want to, and we can like eat whatever we want to, and we can see whatever we want to see, and like, oh, let's go here and here because we can.
Yeah.
It's sort of almost like when you move out of your parents' house and you move into like your first dorm room or your first like house with friends, and you're like, mom can't make me eat broccoli, like I'm gonna eat chips for dinner today. I don't know, maybe that was just me. Or it's like, oh, it's Tuesday, I feel like drinking some wine, I'm gonna do that.
Yeah. But so one of the genesis, I don't know how you pluralize that. The genesis for this conversation was in part, I was at an event and someone brought up this quote or this idea that once you've been an entrepreneur, it kind of breaks you as an employee. Like there's something about it that you just can't deal with. And when I was thinking about it, and I was like, it kind of feels the same way about taking a really long trip. Mm-hmm. And obviously this isn't some sweeping rule that applies to every job, but I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of the kind of standard mainstream career type jobs where you're going to go 9 to 5, work your way to the ladder, work for the weekend, all that type of stuff. Once you've been on this big trip, there's something inside of you that's like, no, not doing it. This can't go on forever. I need to get out of here.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because so when we came back from our first trip, like we were both very, very, very tight on money. We'd basically spent our entire savings. And so alongside having the sort of social, societal pressure that was like, okay, you had your fun, like now it's time to get like serious about your life. It was also this sort of need to make money. And so I know for both of us, you know, we didn't have very much experience. We'd only ever worked summer jobs. We kind of both took like the first jobs that were sort of offered to us and, you know, decent jobs, like entry level, good pay. We lived in Calgary at the time with a thriving oil industry and we're making good money. Lived in a pretty nice place. Like life wasn't bad.
I know. I mean, by conventional standards, it was like exceptionally good.
Yeah. Like we made, you know, good money for what we paid for rent. We lived in a decent place, like had, you know, tight knit, good group of friends. Like life really wasn't bad. From the outside looking in, life was like pretty good. The problem is that when you've experienced so much freedom and then all of a sudden somebody's telling you, you need to dress this way and you need to show up at this time and you need to be here for X amount of hours. And in those X amount of hours, you need to do A, B, C. It's almost, you know, it's fine at first. And then it begins to feel like somebody's like sitting on your chest and they're getting like heavier and heavier as like the moments go on. Is what I would describe it as. Yeah,
I think we both talked about in previous episodes this kind of like post-travel depression, like getting back and kind of feeling glum. And it lasted a while.
And like 2 years until we went traveling again?
I think it was worse at the start. Do you think
Yeah,
true?
Definitely. I think that it's hard to when you enter into a group of friends that hasn't been on this trip with you because your friends don't really want to hear about all your like fun adventures. Like it gets kind of old when you're that person who's like, oh, this reminds me of that one time when I was in Germany drinking beer and eating pretzels, or oh, this reminds me of when we were driving in a van through Australia and you saw a giant toad. Like people just, they don't really want you to rub your adventures in their faces constantly. And so you kind of just, I don't know, it's like you feel like you want to keep this travel alive in you. And I know we've done an episode on keeping travel alive. But at the same time, it's like society's telling you to like stop.
Well,
like,
it's not society.
It kind of is society.
It's like the few people who, I mean, I'm sure there's certain places where people are like, oh, tell me about this. Like, I'm excited.
Yeah, like a traveler's meetup, maybe.
But, you know, some friends are like, oh, hey, this person doing this thing that they were really excited about, that makes me feel kind of uncomfortable about my life. So I'm not going to be very
Yeah.
decide I'm going to, make fun of them, joke with them, tear them down about this thing that made them happy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's also like, I think there is really something that kind of like changes within your mindset when you were traveling on a big trip. And I've talked to lots of other people who have traveled before, and I feel like you're never really the same after traveling long term. And it's hard to simply settle when you know that there's more out there. And I think that that's the big difference. That's the switch between the people that you know in your life who have never traveled before and that the people that you know who have traveled. And there's something that kind of almost unites or bonds you with the people who have traveled because they just kind of get it.
Yeah. What do you think? Or can you explain that a little bit more? Like, how does that apply to being a good employee or being a bad employee?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Tying it back to the topic of the episode. Let's draw it back onto the main trail. It's sort of this,
I guess so it kind of depends on the conception of what it means to be a good employee, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, that'll be different from job to job. I think that every manager has sort of a list of criteria that makes you a good employee, but it can be different as well. Like some managers or bosses value more qualities than others do. But I think, are you asking the things that innately make you bad, or not innately that make you a bad employee once you've traveled, or the things that make you a good employee once you've traveled?
Well, I think that it's, I agree, and I think that I can identify and relate to that. It's something about, you're doing your job, you're learning things, you're improving, it's all right. It's good in some ways. And I think I kind of hit on it before. It's this feeling of okay, this is fine, but this can't be all there is.
Yeah.
I need something in the future that I can look forward to, because if it's just 5 years of this, 10 years of this, 40 years of this, no, there's no point.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I've tied together my two thoughts regarding friends who have traveled versus friends who haven't, and the work thing. I think that sometimes it's, say you're working a job where nobody's ever traveled before, and people don't really understand what you're struggling with when it's my manager wants me here at 8:30 and I showed up at 8:35, and it's this big issue, and they're just show up at 8:30. That's when you're supposed to be here. But you've experienced this freedom in your life where you can wake up when you want and do what you want to do. And that is so it's so empowering to be able to choose what you do with your day and when you show up. And working a job for me, when I'm told you have to be here at this time or you're in trouble, is something I really, really struggle with.
Yeah. And I think it just kind of speaks to living a self-directed life. Mm-hmm. More so, I think it kind of relates to the thing about the entrepreneurship thing too. If you've spent this time as an entrepreneur, you're going to struggle to be put back in the situation where people are oh, you got to do it this way. And you're well, it doesn't really matter productivity wise. Maybe I'd be more productive this way. And they're well, this person's going to be upset, so you got to do it this way. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting. I mean, the great thing about, there's some jobs where people can work from home and they have a lot of freedom to set up their own schedule. Is people are different. Some people are more productive first thing in the morning. They like to get up at 5 a.m. and, do all the stuff they need to do before anyone's even at their computer. I know that that's something that my dad really thrives off of. And it's something that he always really enjoyed about running his own business, was the hours in the early morning before anyone would ever bother him. And I know Asha Berger on the episode, and creating a business abroad, talked about that. That's her peak writing time, because nobody's emailing her, nobody's calling her, nobody's trying to get her attention. It's just her time. Whereas some people, I know my business coach he likes to stay up late because for the same reason, but he just works better at night. And it's kind of cool when you can set up your own schedule. You can find out what times you work best at. Is 6 a.m. your time, or is 10 a.m. your time, or is it after dinner when you really start to thrive and you do your best work from 6 to 11 p.m. at night? And you don't have that choice when you work a 9 to 5. You work from 9 to 5. Doesn't matter like how much you get done. You just need to be there in that time. And that's something that I really, really struggle with. Like, I just wonder how this system has not fallen apart. Like, it really doesn't work. Like, requiring employees to be there from 9 till 5. Like, people are so inefficient.
Well, I think it depends on the type of work, right?
Okay, yeah, that's
like
fair.
This is good for manual labor, and this is good for kind of repeatable tasks and processes, and kind of the less creative, more, I don't know, I was going to say the word mindless. I don't know if that's completely true, but the less creative thing.
Yeah, I guess so. When I said that, I was specifically thinking like office work, and I was thinking the office environments I've worked in where so much dicking around happens. And I know it's always been really frustrating for me because I'm like, I could do all the work I need to get done from 8 till noon, and then I could leave. Instead, I have to be here till 4, and I stretch it out over the course of 8 hours to get it done. I could get it done in half the time, yet I'm required to be here, so why would I be that productive?
So that's kind of how you were feeling during your first job.
Yeah.
After. Travel.
Yeah. I mean, like, I spent so much time. I mean, I spent a lot of time trip planning, to be honest. And I also spent, so this is like a huge eye opener about how unfulfilled I felt, is a lot of time, like I was looking at master's programs, like thinking about going back to school to do something else. I was looking at volunteer programs in other places in the world. I was looking at working abroad, teaching English as a second language. I really was unfulfilled, and I wanted to do something more, and I just didn't know what it was. Like, nothing ever quite like stuck with me enough to do it. But I mean, I would kill hours and hours in a week just looking at different things. And I mean, I don't know, there's probably a person or two who's at a desk job right now listening to this podcast, really like resonating with what we're saying. And I say that because we've both been there. We've both been in that exact situation before.
Yeah. So let's kind of break down this like bad employee thing in travel. The question, I guess. Because I think that in a lot of ways, travel makes you a better employee, like skills wise. I think it is like a really, really good place to improve your skills. But certain types of jobs, it makes you kind of like not incapable, but like unwilling to play certain games. And I don't want to generalize, but it feels like some of the political aspects of work and some of the seriousness and like the level of stress and intensity about it kind of seem like weird when you've.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's something like fundamentally has changed about your perspective once you've had this experience of feeling really like self-directed, but you go into these situations and maybe it's a meeting and everyone's like, you know, doing their like businessy seriousness thing. And everyone's putting their voice in there and talking when it's a decision that could be made quite easily. It's like, okay, someone's like, okay, we need to do this thing. And someone's like, okay, let's do it this way. And you're like, boom, problem solved. But it's like you're in, you know, someone's talking and this, I think, political environment. And it all seems very weird. Like, why is everyone so like intense about this situation?
Yeah.
Do you resonate with that at all?
Yeah, I definitely do. I remember meetings when I worked in corporate were just like hours and hours and hours. And I'd just be like sitting there being like, why are we still here? Like, I've got like real things to do and I'm hungry and I've got to go to the bathroom and this is so ridiculous. But something that I always found, or I found quite often working in corporate, is a lot of confusion. Like, I felt confused at the level of importance that was being put on what I was doing. Like, I was like, this doesn't really matter. Like, it just doesn't. And I mean, maybe part of that was sort of that it wasn't a job that I was passionate about. And I think it's important to have passion and to really care about what you do. But I mean, to a certain level, like, you know, recognize what you're doing on the whole scale of, you know, the world.
And your life.
Yeah. And I just felt that sometimes I'd come home like kind of wearing this stress, and I was like, I don't even care about any of this. Like, why am I stressed about so-and-so's freaking package, like not getting to them in the mail. Like it doesn't matter. But to be this big stressor in the office, like, oh my God, we got the address wrong, like blah, 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 blah. And I was just like, I don't know why we're all freaking out about this. Like it can be remedied very easily. Like things like that just I found confusing.
What do you think it is about travel that makes you question the seriousness of work or like the corporate job thing?
I think part of it is like leaving sort of the bubble that can be your life at home and realizing that there's a lot of things happening in the world. Like as we're talking about this, there's a lot of things happening. Like there's people dying, there's people being born, like babies being born. There's people in countries around the world that are being treated like very, very poorly. There's war happening. There's people starving to death. And I feel like when you see some of it or when you experience some of it, it kind of opens your eyes to this like, wow, like this world is a really big place and there's a lot of freaking people out there and there's a lot of people who are having all these different experiences. Like every single person on planet Earth right now is living a different experience than we are. And when you put it into perspective that way, the world becomes a lot bigger than the world that you previously knew as, you know, your little social circle, your work life. And all of a sudden it's like, why are we sitting in this meeting wasting our time talking about this when it just doesn't matter? Like, why are we arguing over this thing that is so insignificant on the greater scale?
Yeah. And it's almost like the pathway, right, from elementary school to high school to university into your first job, up the corporate ladder, that kind of pathway. It seems like you're, you know, it looks like it feels good from the outside where you're like, oh, it's so cool. Like you see that when you're in university or something and you see these people who have started their career and they're making money and they're driving a nice car and they've got nice suits and they live in a cool apartment. And then you get there and you're like, this isn't great. But you see people a bit older who's got nicer cars and like living in cool houses and going on cool trips. And you're like, oh, that's really looks really cool. And maybe when you've never left that bubble, you can keep kind of chasing that carrot as it moves farther and farther away from you. And you're like, okay, when I get there, then it'll feel good. But when you've gone traveling and you'd be like, okay, for like literally less money than I'm spending to live here working this job, I could be out doing something that I know feels good because I've done it. And it's easily accessible to me. I could just be like, oh, hey, I'm going to quit and go there and like, I don't know, need hardly any money to do it because the cost of living is so much cheaper. I've got enough savings. At any moment, you could just be like, okay, peace out. And I can be happy. Then it makes the whole thing seem a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Less, and it's like you're chasing something, but then you're kind of given this view of the outside of that chase.
Yeah. And a thought just kind of came to me on, you know, if the world that you know is all you know, you want to make something matter. So you make what you know matter, which is probably your job, maybe the things going on with your friends, maybe, you know, putting pressure on your family to act a certain way, like expectations on them to be, you know, at your birthday or at your baby's first birthday or whatever it is that you're placing meaning on. But it's, you know, we all want things to be meaningful in our lives. I think that's a pretty innately human characteristic. And if you haven't experienced something bigger than your small world that you live in, you just make the things that, you know, feel important in your life matter. And I think that's where it comes from when you walk into a meeting and it's something that you're not passionate about, but, you know, you've got this manager, this boss, or this director who's worked for that company for 10 years. And that's what he's made matter in his life. And so he wants to sit there for 3 hours and debate every single aspect of it. Whereas maybe for you, you've experienced the world in a different way. Like I know for me, it's really hard for me after all the experiences I've had in the world to make something in a corporate office really be meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm. But it's not, it's not necessarily about like any job. It's like those jobs where you can't can't find the meaning, because I think that there are ways where you go traveling, you connect with this desire to have more meaning.
Yeah. And I think this is a good, place to talk about how you can be a really good employee, because I think that if you can find something that you're extremely passionate about and that, find a schedule that really works for you, I think you can be very efficient and you can work very hard to do what it is that you actually care about. But I think for me, the biggest thing that travel has changed in me or helped me to see is that I don't want to spend my life doing things that I don't care about, because I've experienced something that's better than doing things that don't make me happy.
Mm-hmm.
I guess. And I mean, I've talked to people who have no interest in travel, and maybe travel isn't for everyone. I don't really know. I don't want to put this thing out there that you have to travel, but I know that for me, travel is the thing that's changed my life in the biggest way and changed my life for the better. And sure, it's made me a worse employee in a job setting where I don't feel passionate, where I don't really want to be there, where I don't really like the structure. But then when it comes to doing things that I actually care about doing, I feel like it's given me more skills. It's opened my mind to possibilities, and it's allowed me to channel that passion a lot better. So I think that's kind of the pro and con there, and good versus bad employee. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would agree. Basically, I think that going traveling has really improved my ability to add value to certain organizations, but it's made it harder for me to bear with doing things that I feel like aren't efficient or I don't care about, or being wrapped up in these situations and being more self-sacrificial in a way. I don't want to keep doing something that's not making me feel happy. I don't want to do things that I don't like in exchange for money, in exchange for prestige or status, which I think that's kind of the trade-off that a lot of standard careers, and I think that the world's changing and those standard careers are kind of diminishing in exchange for other ones. But I think that's the trade-off. You get the approval of your social circle, you get status, you get money, but you sacrifice kind of just day-to-day enjoyment.
Yeah, definitely. I love what you said about it makes you less tolerable or tolerant of things that don't make you happy. And I think that is a huge part of it, is that you've had this experience where if you wake up in a city and you're I don't really like it here, you have the ability to change cities. You have the ability to change your situation quite easily. There's so much choice and empowerment in your day-to-day life traveling. And it does make you less tolerable when you get into a job where you're I'm working with people that I really don't share values with. I'm working this job that I really don't care about. I'm doing stuff that I'm not interested in. And it makes you less tolerable for those things. And I remember there's kind of this idea that kind of gets passed down, you got to put your time in, or you got to do what you got to do to make ends meet. And those statements to me are really confusing, because in my mind, I'm do I? Why do I have to do that? There are so many choices.
Well, you have to do, you have to be able to survive. But yeah, there are way more ways to survive than you would could ever imagine, really.
Yeah. So, I mean, just getting into that specifically for me, it's I worked a corporate job where I felt there was a lot of office politics and a lot of frustrating things, and I wasn't super passionate about what I was doing. And I feel the message I was getting from, my family was you got to put your time in, you've got to kind of do the brunt work to work your way up. You've got to just push through. You've got to have this on your resume for X amount of time. Otherwise, it's going to hurt your chances of getting a career in the future. And I was I feel all of this messaging that I'm getting is really confusing, because I feel I don't need to do that. And I mean, eventually we quit those jobs that we were working, and we went to South America for 6 months. And I think that really hardened that belief in my mind as something that was not just something I thought and something that I knew to be true. And I think that that's really why we chose to move away from the city when we came back, and we both got jobs in the restaurant, customer service industry, retail. And I think that's really where that decision came from.
And what was going through your head job-wise when we left to go on our second trip to South America?
I don't think that there was much thinking about what was coming in the future. It was just, I knew I needed to not be in the situation that I was in anymore. I think that was all for me. I think it was knowing that I needed to get away. Like, just, I needed to go. And there was no thought to what was going to happen when I came back.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I think that was what was going through my head was, this sucks. And then it's like, whew, finally, we're out. We've escaped. We've made it out of here. Yeah.
Like, I think realistically, I was just really avoiding thinking about anything having to do with working. Like, I was like, I need to not work. I need to not work this job. I need to, like, get away from this life. Like, I just can't do it anymore. I need some space and some freedom and some, like, time to just be me.
Yeah. And then when we were traveling, it took a while. Like, I think if you're going on a 6-month trip, you can probably relate to this feeling of it's, you know, in month number 2, maybe the thought comes up about the end of your trip and you're like, 4 months left, whatever. And then you hit halfway and you're like, whoa, that's halfway. And maybe that thought comes back. And then when you're like 2 months left, you're like, okay. And this thought kind of keeps occurring to you of the end of your trip, but it's easy to put it off at the start.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's almost other people that kind of make you start thinking about it, or at least for me, it's emails from my good friends that are like, so what's on the agenda when you guys get back from South America? It's my family. Like, so what are you guys planning to do when you get home? I feel like it was really the external stuff that kind of got me thinking about it. I was like, oh, yikes. Like, I'm not ready. I don't know yet. Like, leave me alone. Don't make me think about this.
Yeah.
And then at some point, I think maybe like a month before we got home was when you and I really started talking about what was like next for us.
Yeah. And when we had been traveling the second time, once again, you kind of meet all these people doing all these things, and you kind of broadens your view of what the possible options are for you. So we had talked to people who had been in Asia teaching English, and people who had been out traveling, like woofing, people who were finding ways to continue traveling without much in the way of savings. Mm-hmm. And people who, you know, moving places to work, retail jobs and things like that. And even though I knew that was always a possibility, like obviously when I was 21, I knew that I could get a job at a restaurant if I wanted to. Well,
was it really a possibility to you in your mind?
In my head in that time, I was like, I am a certain type of person who needs to be doing a certain type of thing. Like, I went to business school. That means for me, I need to be doing X job or else I'm failing.
Yeah, it's sort of this idea of like, so you have a 6-month gap on your resume, then you worked for a couple of years. Now you've put this other 6-month gap on your resume. So how's it going to look if you work in retail for a couple of years? Like, what is that going to do to your resume? Now you're like 3 years behind your peers. Like, you're basically screwing yourself over.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people have talked about this idea of how university is really supposed to open up your options. You go there so that this new thing becomes an option. But in a lot of ways, mentally, it kind of closes down options. If you go to business school and become a finance major, it makes you think, well, you know, I can't go work at McDonald's. I can't work at Walmart. I can't work in the restaurant industry. I can't do all of these things because I am a finance person.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of interesting. It makes me think back to the summer between 3rd and 4th year university. I got a job working for an amusement park that is kind of just outside the city of Calgary. And it was a job that was for people in university with like business degrees, doing more of like, you'd have an area in the park and teenagers would be like your little employees, I guess, that you kind of like
little employees
that you major.
Yeah, like a management job.
Yeah, but not like a high level management job. Like, you're managing like, you know, 14 to 18 year olds type thing. You're not managing like anything higher level, and it's people like at the cotton candy booth type thing. And I got this job and I did a little bit of the training for it. And then I actually got offered another job that was it was in marketing. That was my major. I remember talking to one of my best friends about it, and I was like, I'd be crazy to turn this job down. Like, I need to do this job. And so I ended up going with the other job. But there was always a part of me that was like, it would have been really fun to spend my summer outside, cruising around an amusement park, eating cotton candy, like hanging out with teenagers. And there was this part of me that was like, it would have been way more like freeing than, being confined to an office and that sort of thing. But it just felt like that's what I should do. And I know that when we made the decision to move away from the city, there was a part of me that was a little bit self-conscious about choosing to work in retail. Like, I had to really, I don't know, it was a little bit hard at first. Like, it was kind of this, like, I've got a business degree. Like, I don't want to be like too defensive about it, but it's almost like I felt like I was a little bit better than what I was doing.
Yeah, and you worry about, we've talked about this on previous episodes too, about worrying what people think of you, because it's almost like people expect a certain thing of you, and like, oh, Amanda, she's really gone off course, or Ryan, like, he's working at a coffee shop, like, he's really not doing well.
Even though in reality, like, do you feel like you were doing better?
Yeah, I mean, much more like personally satisfied and happier. And I want to tie back, we've got an episode coming out next week with Jake DeSillis.
From The Voluntary Life.
Who has a book called Job Free, where he kind of goes into some of these ideas about how you can make your life not dependent on a job. That's in air quotes for anyone listening.
For everyone who can't see you.
Yeah, and he kind of outlines like working a job you may not find fulfilling, but saving a lot of money so you can quit and retire quickly. Finding a job that's not really a job, something you enjoy doing, and even though it doesn't pay you much money, you feel satisfied with it because it affords you a lifestyle. It's kind of unjobbing. Creating a lifestyle business that is, you're kind of an entrepreneur, you're doing something you care about. So it's not really a job, you're happy to do it, and you make enough money to continue living the lifestyle you want. Or actually becoming an entrepreneur, starting a business, working hard at it so you can create a bunch of value and then sell it and maintain. And then really like go out and live the life you want. And I think that when we were in South America, we came to this realization on our own, really. I didn't think about a couple of those routes, but we're kind of really settled on this idea of, well, it's not worth it to me. I don't want to make this sacrifice and live, 10 years doing something I don't like. Mm-hmm. So that in the future I may have the chance to do something like that. It's not worth it to me to make that sacrifice. Like, I just want to do something that I like doing. So we made the decision to go work in cafe, work in retail, and live in a really cool place.
Yeah.
But I think that it is... I think that for some people, we both grew up around entrepreneurship through your parents and my parents both having family businesses. But for some people, like, going out and getting a job feels like kind of like the only way in some ways.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point. And I just wanted to make a comment quickly because what you were just talking about reminded me of a conversation I had with a friend one time. And I think I may have brought this up on a past episode, but we were talking and this person was saying that they were really excited to get to the place that their parents were at. And I had like this moment of confusion because I was like, we're, in our mid-20s. We weren't even in our mid-20s at this point. I think we were like 23. And I was like, we're in our 20s, like 20s, 30s, like 40s even. Like, that's like the prime of your life. Like, that's the time to be chasing your dreams and doing what you want to do. To me, it's not about killing yourself in your 20s, 30s, 40s so that your 50s and 60s and 70s can be great. I'm not saying that your 50s, 60s, 70s shouldn't be great. I think that all the years of your life should be great. But it just seemed so confusing to me to hear this comment from somebody who's 23 who's like, I just want to be, in my 50s living how my parents are living. And I was like, your parents should want to live how you're living. Like, that's how it should be in my mind.
So how do you think travel played into that? Do you think that going on this 6-month trip changed your perspective on that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that, obviously we were talking about at the beginning of the episode how we went on this trip really thinking like, okay, this is our time to kind of live it up before we like jump back into life and like settle down and, do this life thing where we work jobs and we get married and we buy our house and we like pop out some babies and then we like, continue to work and raise children. And which is, that's how I was brought up to think that life was. That's what you do in your life. And until traveling, I didn't know that there was any other options really. And I think that travel just allowed me to meet people and see different cultures and see the different ways that people were living. And then I got back and a lot of things were confusing about life for me. Like it almost felt like I was an alien entering back into, like an alien had possessed my body and entered back into my life and was like, what is this strange place that you live in? And what are these strange things that you're supposed to be doing? What are these strange things that you are doing? Apparently, my alien self is part British. But
like, it's like these cultural assumptions that maybe you don't question when you're in it. You don't even notice them in a lot of ways. Oh, that's just the way that things got to be. And then when you leave and you come back, you're like, oh, this thing is actually very, very weird.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. And so having this conversation with this friend who's 23 at the time, now 27. And it's like, why would you want to miss out on most of your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, and half of your 50s to be where your parents are at? Like, that is so crazy to me.
It's like the movie Click.
Yeah. Like, these are not the years of my life that I want to fast forward.
No, but that point of view does make a lot of sense given the kind of conventional course of life, right? Where it's about you go to high school and you work hard there so you can get to university. You go to university, you work hard there so you get a first job. You make these sacrifices. You do what you got to do in your first job to get the next job, and so on and so on and so on up the ladder until finally you have arrived when you're the president of a company or when you retire and you've got a few $1 million. The conventional life tells you build, sacrifice along the way to the future. Yeah. So that it makes sense. It's like, well, I don't want to keep doing this sacrificing thing. It's fucking not that great. And then it makes sense to be like, oh, I want to be like Adam Sandler and Click and go fast forward through everything, get to the point where I have arrived.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It does make sense when you put it like that, but it still makes me like, I feel really sad thinking about it, to be honest. Like, we only get to live like once. And that's like what you want to do. You want to just fast forward the majority of your life or 30 years of your life, like probably 1/3 of your life at the time that you're going to be the most like healthy and active so that you can, someday maybe enjoy the money that you've worked so freaking hard for. Like, I don't know. It's confusing for me, to be honest. I understand it when you just say it the way you did, but it's still like a confusing thought process for me. I think just because I've seen the other options that are out there and the different ways that you can live. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because when we came back from South America, people obviously had expectations of us. We went to business school, we worked these jobs. It was kind of a little bit frowned upon us when we quit our jobs. And
what do you mean frowned upon?
I think some people in our lives were a little bit like, well, you guys already did this thing. Like, you don't get to do that again.
I remember making this decision that I wasn't going to go back and get like a real
job.
Like
I used to call it my big girl job, and my assistant manager when I worked at Lululemon was like, "This is your big girl job, Amanda," and I was like, "I'm sorry, this isn't a big girl job."
But yeah, in that way, and I remember feeling nervous about talking to my parents about it and having a conversation with my dad where I'm like, "Oh yeah, we're thinking of moving to Canmore," and he's like, "Oh, that's a long commute into Calgary." Obviously, the assumptions he's making in mind are, "Oh, I'm going to get a corporate job that relates to my business degree in the city and then want to like live out there and drive into the city to continue working." And I'm like, actually, no, I'm not doing that. I'm going to get a job at a cafe and learn how to make like cool latte art. Yeah, it was like scary for me at that time.
Yeah. I mean, I remember my brother called me one day and he was like, "I don't understand why you're working at Lululemon when you could have a high paying job in Calgary at an oil and gas company? And I was like, I think what you're missing is that I'm choosing not to have that. I don't think I'm incapable of getting that job. I think I'm quite capable and quite qualified to get a job at some oil and gas company, getting paid, 50, 60K a year. I think that I've got the skills to do that. I don't not doubt that. That's not what I want to do. And I think that was like it's just there's silence on the other end of the phone, like just this complete and utter confusion. Like just really not even comprehending what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I think that for me, that plays back to this question of, does travel make you a bad employee? And it's maybe more broader than that. Like, does travel make you worse at the conventional life? And I think that it does in some ways, because you go out and you broaden your perspective, and then you come back and you're like, I don't want to do all these things that make sense in this conventional way of thinking about it, but they don't make sense once you realize that you can go support yourself and have fun and live a more fulfilling life other ways.
I think too, something that's interesting to kind of like countering. So we traveled, then we worked. And so we kind of got this taste of traveling, and then this taste of like corporate lifestyle, conventional lifestyle. And then we traveled again. And I feel like the feelings between working this corporate conventional job and then traveling for the second time, I feel like that's where I could clearly see the dichotomy of happiness and freedom versus unhappiness and feeling stuck. I think I didn't see that as much when we traveled the first time. Like, yes, it felt really freeing to choose everything I wanted to do about my day because I'd been in school for all the years of my life that I could remember. And I'd always had structure and things that I had to do and people telling me what I had to do. But the second time we traveled, I feel like it was this like shedding this weight off my back, like getting rid of this stress, getting rid of this pressure, and being like, wow, like I don't want to feel like that like ever again. Like I don't want to feel like burdened by, what I'm doing 40 hours a week with my life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's an interesting perspective on it too. And I think if we're talking about my employeeship, I think it's
employability.
Maybe not employability. I think I was still quite employable, but I think that shift was what really made me, I think, a bad employee in a lot of ways. A bad employee for a job that I'm not passionate about.
Yeah.
I think that was that's where it really became like experiencing happiness and freedom for a second time and being like, wow, this is so awesome. Like I love like every minute of my life. Like why have I not been living like this? Was where my tolerance really went like down for things that I'm not happy about. Even on days at Lululemon where it's like, why are we getting so stressed out about like stretchy pants? Like, I don't care about this. Like, I'm not putting not putting up with your crap. Like, I'm going home now.
You care about like doing a good job and doing it well, but it's like, yeah, you realize that on the same thing, while it's important to you, it's also extremely unimportant in the greater scheme of things. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that I was a great employee when I worked at Lululemon. And I think that, I genuinely I wanted to be somebody who can make somebody's day at the store in terms of like a customer. So I think that I was good at my job in that way. But then when there was like this little nitty gritty political type stuff, I was just like, I don't feel like dealing with this. I'm going to evacuate the dance floor.
Yeah. So getting back to the main question of the episode, does travel make you a bad employee? I think that you kind of touched on a lot of these things. And to conclude, I'd say that we both feel like as skillful, valuable human beings, traveling has been awesome.
Yeah.
12 months of the best invested time in terms of improving ourselves as
time and money.
Yeah. Time and money for improving ourselves as human beings. And if you can find a way to be an employee and have the freedom that you need and have the meaning that you need and have the creative expression that you need in a job, like, yeah, travel is going to make you better at that job. But if you're talking about just going out on the career listings, finding a job that's going to be kind of your standard typical job, going out and having this experience traveling might make that a little bit hard to bear, because it's going to smash these assumptions about how you need to be sacrificing all the way up into your life until you're in like your 50s, and then you can go do whatever you want.
Yeah, definitely. And I sort of just had the thought about, a lot of people out there might be thinking like, what was it about working at a cafe or working in retail that was more fulfilling than doing something that, made more money? And I think that's what worked for us, because it gave us the time and space after work to do the things that we're more passionate about. Mm-hmm. And it was, more of like a fun work environment. There was less pressure. There wasn't as much drama. And I think that's what made those jobs better. But I think it's important for people to kind of find, if you need to work just to make money, maybe it's not retail, cafe, customer service. Maybe you hate that. So
yeah, and
that's not necessarily the path for everyone.
It's like time, space to live the life we wanted in a place that was awesome lifestyle wise. But it also gives you the mental energy, because you leave work and your work is a very manually focused thing. So there's nothing to think about. There's nothing to fret about. Like you do occasionally. You're like worried about a situation at work, maybe a relationship, but it's not like, oh, I could be doing this now, or maybe on the weekend I should work on this thing, or all these things that are running through your head because you've got so much responsibility. Not the case in these types of jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No, I think that really sums it up for me. If you're out there listening and you can relate to this at all, or have any ideas that you'd like to share with us, it'd be awesome to hear from you guys. If you want to send us an email, or like our Facebook page and send us a message on there.
Yeah, definitely. And our email is info@theworldwanderers.com.
Yes.
And you can visit www.theworldwanderers.com to check out show notes for this episode, as well as all of our other episodes. And have a great day.
Ciao.